My sister said adopted kids don't belong at the main table during the family reunion, making sure to set up a separate kids' table in the backyard for me and my 8-year-old daughter while her twin sat beside her. Grandma Rose, who was always quiet about these humiliations, just watched as my sister explained to everyone that blood ties are more important. A week later, I got a call from Miller & Associates law firm informing me that I was the sole beneficiary of Grandma's $5,700,000 estate, along with a note from her. Your sister was right about blood not making family. You proved that by visiting me every Thursday for 15 years. The words hit like physical blows, as 37 family members turned to stare at the backyard where my daughter Emma sat alone at a plastic folding table, her little shoulders hunched in shame. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand gestured dismissively toward us like we were unwanted pets. I mean, let's be realistic here. Rebecca was a charity case when Mom and Dad took her in, and now she's trying to pass that DNA down to poor Emma. It's just not the same as real family. Emma's fork clattered against her paper plate as hot tears started rolling down her cheeks. The adults around the mahogany dining table, aunts, uncles, cousins who had known me for 28 years, said nothing. Just uncomfortable shifting and studied examination of their silverware. Victoria's twins, Mason and Madison, both 10 years old, smirked from their cushioned seats as their mother continued her performance. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. We need to preserve authentic family traditions. I stood slowly, my hands surprisingly steady as I picked up my wine glass and Emma's juice box. Every eye in that dining room followed my movement, waiting for tears or pleading or some dramatic collapse. Instead, I walked calmly to where my daughter sat and pulled up the empty chair beside her. You know what, sweetheart? Sometimes the best conversations happen away from all the noise. I clinked my wine glass against her juice box with a smile that made Victoria's expression falter slightly. What none of them knew, what Victoria especially didn't know, was that I'd been Grandma Rose's Thursday companion for 15 straight years. Not just holiday visits or birthday calls, but every single Thursday at 2:30 p.m. in her assisted living facility. I'd held her hand through chemotherapy, celebrated her small victories, and listened to every story about the family that was supposedly more hers than mine. I'd also been the one handling her financial paperwork for the past 3 years, ever since her arthritis made writing difficult. The reunion continued around us, but something had shifted. Uncle Paul kept glancing our way with what looked like guilt. Cousin Jennifer whispered something to her husband that made him frown at Victoria. Even Victoria's own mother-in-law, who'd driven 4 hours to attend, seemed uncomfortable with the seating arrangement. But Victoria herself remained oblivious, basking in what she thought was her moment of family hierarchy clarification. After dinner, as people gathered in the living room for dessert, I helped clear plates from both tables. Victoria cornered me in the kitchen, her voice low but vicious. I hope you understand this isn't personal, Rebecca. It's just important for the children to understand their real place in the family structure. Emma needs to learn that some connections run deeper than others. She touched her chest dramatically. Blood calls to blood. It's biology. I nodded thoughtfully, rinsing a serving bowl with careful attention. You're absolutely right about biology, Victoria, and about family connections running deep. I dried my hands on the dish towel, meeting her eyes directly. Some connections definitely run much deeper than others. She smiled, satisfied that her message had been received. What she didn't see was my phone buzzing with a text from Miller & Associates confirming our Monday appointment. What she couldn't have imagined was the manila envelope sitting in my car, containing documents that would redefine her understanding of family hierarchy forever. The evening wound down with the usual promises to stay in touch and see each other soon. Victoria hugged me goodbye with theatrical warmth, whispering, "I'm so glad we had this conversation. It needed to be said." Her twins barely acknowledged Emma as they loaded into their BMW, already discussing their upcoming vacation to Disneyland. As I buckled Emma into her car seat, she looked up at me with those serious brown eyes that always seemed too wise for her age. "Mommy, why did Aunt Victoria say those things about us?" I smoothed her hair gently, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people need to feel important by making others feel small. But you know what I learned tonight? The people who truly matter never need to announce how important they are." Driving home through the darkness, I thought about Grandma Rose's last coherent conversation with me just 2 weeks ago. She'd grabbed my hand with surprising strength and said, "Victoria thinks she knows what family means, Rebecca. She thinks it's about who shares her DNA. But I've been watching for 8 decades, and I can tell you, family is about who shows up. Family is about who stays." I'd thought she was just being sentimental, maybe confused by her medication. Now I understood she'd been completely lucid, more lucid than any of us realized. Monday morning couldn't come fast enough. Monday arrived with Seattle's typical drizzle, but I felt electric with anticipation as I walked into the glass towers of Miller & Associates. The receptionist led me to a conference room where 2 attorneys waited. Margaret Miller herself, a silver-haired woman whose reputation preceded her, and her associate David Chen, who looked barely older than me but carried himself with quiet confidence. "Ms. Thompson, please accept our condolences for your loss," Margaret began, sliding a thick folder across the mahogany table. Rose Patterson was quite specific about her wishes and, frankly, quite strategic in her planning. She updated her will 6 months ago and specifically requested that we handle the reading personally, rather than through a family gathering. David opened his laptop and pulled up financial documents that made my breath catch. The estate includes the family home in Queen Anne, valued at $2,800,000, plus investment portfolios worth $2,900,000. There are also several smaller properties and accounts that bring the total to $5,700,000, exactly as we mentioned on the phone. But Margaret held up her hand before I could process the numbers fully. "There's something else, Rebecca. Something Rose was very particular about. She left detailed instructions about how certain family members have treated you over the years, and she's included specific conditions regarding Victoria." She pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandma Rose's shaky handwriting. Inside was a letter that made my hands tremble as I read. "My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, then Victoria has finally shown her true colors publicly. I've been watching and waiting, knowing this day would come. She's always resented that your parents chose you, never understanding that love isn't diminished by sharing it. You proved that family isn't about blood when you visited me every Thursday for 15 years, while she managed maybe 15 visits total." The letter continued with details that stunned me. Grandma Rose had been documenting Victoria's behavior for years. The snide comments, the deliberate exclusions, the way she'd poisoned family gatherings with her hierarchy obsession. She thinks the family money will naturally flow to her because she's the real granddaughter. She's even made comments to your Aunt Linda about expecting to inherit the Queen Anne house for her children. Margaret watched my face as I read. Rose was quite thorough in her observations. She also left specific instructions about timing. You're to take possession of all properties immediately, and she wanted Victoria to learn about the inheritance in a very particular way. David pulled out another document. There's also this restraining order template she had prepared. Apparently, she anticipated Victoria might react poorly to being excluded entirely. The financial paperwork took 2 hours to complete. Property deeds, investment transfers, bank account authorizations. Each signature felt like thunder rolling through my chest. When we finished, Margaret handed me a set of keys and an address I knew by heart. "The Queen Anne house is yours as of today. Rose specifically wanted you to change the locks before making any announcements." Driving to Grandma Rose's house, my house now, felt surreal. The 3-story Victorian sat on a quiet street overlooking Elliott Bay, worth more than I'd earned in my entire life. Inside, everything remained exactly as Rose had left it. Antique furniture, family photographs spanning 8 decades, and the subtle scent of her lavender perfume still lingering in the air. In her bedroom, I found another envelope marked, "For Victoria's education." Inside were copies of bank statements showing Victoria's requests for loans over the years, 23 different occasions where she'd asked Grandma Rose for money, from her wedding expenses to her children's private school tuition. Each request had been fulfilled without question, totaling over $150,000. But what made my blood run cold was the final document. A recording device Rose had hidden during Victoria's last visit 3 months ago. I pressed play and heard my sister's voice, clear and calculating. "Honestly, Grandma, Rebecca's just not family like Mason and Madison are. When you're gone, I think it would be better if we limited her involvement in family decisions. She doesn't understand our history the way blood relatives do. That evening, I sat in Rose's kitchen, my kitchen, with Emma doing homework at the table while I planned the next phase. Victoria's phone call came exactly at 8 p.m., her voice syrupy with false concern. "Rebecca, sweetie, I heard you met with some lawyers today about Grandma's affairs. I hope you know that our family appreciates everything you did for her, but now it's time for the real family to handle her estate properly." I let her continue for 3 full minutes, detailing her plans for the house, her children's educational funds, and her vision for preserving Rose's legacy within the bloodline. When she finally paused for breath, I spoke quietly into the phone. "Victoria, I need to tell you something important about Grandma Rose's will." Her intake of breath was sharp with anticipation. "What did she leave for the children? I know she wanted Mason and Madison to have her jewelry collection, and obviously the house should stay in the family." "You're absolutely right about the house staying in the family," I said, watching Emma color at the table. "It's staying with the family member who loved Rose enough to visit her every Thursday for 15 years, the family member who held her hand during chemotherapy, the family member who never once asked her for money." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then Victoria's voice came back, dangerous and low. "What exactly are you saying, Rebecca?" "I'm saying Grandma Rose left everything to me. Every property, every investment, every bank account. You and your children weren't mentioned in her will at all." The explosion of rage was immediate and spectacular. Victoria screamed accusations about manipulation, about taking advantage of an elderly woman, about stealing what rightfully belonged to her children. Through it all, I remained calm, listening to her reveal exactly who she'd always been beneath the family dinner politeness. When she finally exhausted herself, I delivered the final blow. "Oh, and Victoria? I have a recording of your last conversation with Grandma Rose, the one where you told her I wasn't really family and should be excluded from family decisions. Miller and Associates has copies of everything." The line went dead. Within an hour, my phone was ringing constantly, Victoria's husband calling to discuss this misunderstanding, my adoptive mother wanting to mediate family harmony, cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly concerned about family unity. I turned off my phone and tucked Emma into bed in what had been Rose's guest room. As I kissed her goodnight, she whispered, "Mommy, this house feels like home. Did Grandma Rose know we belonged here?" Looking around at the family photos that now included us, at the home that was truly ours, I smiled. Yes, sweetheart. She knew exactly where we belonged. The next morning brought Victoria to my doorstep at 7 a.m., her face twisted with fury and desperation. Through the security system Rose had installed, I watched her pound on the door while Mason and Madison sat in her idling BMW, witnessing their mother's complete breakdown. She screamed about lawyers and contests and family rights until neighbors began emerging from their houses to watch the spectacle. I waited until she'd exhausted herself before opening the door, dressed in my work clothes and carrying Emma's school backpack. "Victoria, you're trespassing on private property. I suggest you leave before I call the police." Her eyes were bloodshot from crying, her perfectly styled hair disheveled from pulling at it. "You manipulated a sick old woman. She wasn't in her right mind when she changed that will. Everyone knows you were just waiting for her to die so you could steal our inheritance." From behind me, Emma appeared in her school uniform, clutching her lunchbox. Victoria's voice immediately shifted to manipulation mode. "Emma, sweetheart, tell your mommy that family should share everything equally. Tell her that Grandma Rose loved all her grandchildren the same." I stepped protectively in front of my daughter. "Emma, go start the car, please. We don't want to be late for school." As my daughter walked past Victoria without acknowledgement, I leaned closer to my sister. "You have 30 seconds to get off my property before I call both the police and your children's school to report this behavior." The threat of public humiliation at Mason and Madison's elite private school was enough to make Victoria retreat, but not before delivering her parting shot. "This isn't over, Rebecca. Real family doesn't just disappear because some old woman got confused about who deserved her money." At work that afternoon, I received a call from Margaret Miller. "Rebecca, we need to discuss something urgent. Victoria has hired Blackstone and Associates to contest the will. They're claiming Rose lacked mental capacity and that you exercised undue influence." My stomach dropped, but Margaret's tone remained confident. Here's what they don't know. Rose anticipated this exact challenge. She had herself evaluated by 3 different psychiatrists over the past year, specifically to document her mental competency. She also installed security cameras in her apartment that recorded every one of your visits, proving there was never any coercion or manipulation. The relief was overwhelming, but Margaret wasn't finished. There's more. Rose left instructions for how to handle Victoria's legal challenge. She wanted you to release specific information publicly if Victoria tried to contest the will. That evening, I sat in Rose's study reviewing the evidence she'd compiled. Financial records showing Victoria's constant requests for money, screenshots of social media posts where Victoria complained about supporting elderly relatives. Most damaging of all, a series of emails Victoria had sent to cousins discussing how to manage Rose's assets when she became too old to make good decisions. But the nuclear option Rose had prepared was a video recording from her 85th birthday party 2 years ago. In it, Victoria could be heard telling her husband, "We just need to be patient. Once the old lady's gone, we'll finally get what we deserve. Rebecca can't inherit anything because she's not really family." Rose had been standing just out of frame, hearing every word. Wednesday brought news that Victoria had escalated beyond legal challenges. She'd contacted Emma's school, claiming I was an unfit guardian who had come into money through questionable means. She'd called my workplace, suggesting I was under investigation for elder abuse. Most viciously, she'd started a whisper campaign among extended family members, painting me as a gold digger who'd isolated Rose from her real family. The attack on my daughter's stability was the final straw. I called Margaret and gave her permission to release everything. The local news picked up the story first. Family will contest reveals years of financial manipulation. The reporter had done her homework, contrasting Victoria's minimal visits to Rose with my 15-year commitment. The security footage of my Thursday visits, showing me reading to Rose, helping with physical therapy, and simply sitting with her during lonely afternoons, played alongside footage of Victoria's rare appearances, where she typically asked for money within the first 10 minutes. But the social media explosion came when someone leaked Victoria's birthday party recording. The video went viral with the hashtag #OdgerBloodIsn'tFamily, with thousands of commenters sharing their own adoption stories and praising Rose's wisdom in recognizing true devotion over biological connection. Victoria's response was to double down on her victimhood narrative. She gave an interview claiming I had brainwashed Rose against her biological family and that adoption agencies should better screen prospective parents to prevent situations like this. The interview backfired spectacularly when she couldn't answer basic questions about Rose's medical conditions, favorite foods, or daily routines, information any loving granddaughter would know. Meanwhile, the legal discovery process had uncovered Victoria's true motivations. Her husband's business was failing, they'd already spent their children's college funds, and they were facing foreclosure on their home. The inheritance wasn't about family legacy, it was about financial survival. By Friday, Victoria's world was crumbling in real time. Her children's private school had asked her to consider other educational options after she'd created disturbances during pickup. Her husband's remaining business partners had distanced themselves from the family's public meltdown. Even her closest friends were avoiding her calls as the extent of her manipulation became public knowledge. That evening, I found Emma in the garden behind our new home, carefully tending to Rose's prize-winning roses. "Mommy, why is Aunt Victoria so angry about us living in Grandma Rose's house?" I knelt beside her, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people think they deserve things just because they want them. But Grandma Rose understood that love is something you earn through your actions, not something you inherit through your DNA." Emma nodded solemnly, then brightened. "I'm glad Grandma Rose knew how much we loved her. This house feels like it was waiting for us." Looking at my daughter in the garden that was now hers, surrounded by the home that would provide for her education and future, I felt something I'd never experienced before. The absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. Victoria could contest and scheme and manipulate all she wanted. Rose had planned for everything, and her final lesson was about to teach my sister the true meaning of family consequences. The courthouse steps on Monday morning looked like a media circus. Victoria arrived in her BMW, flanked by her expensive legal team, playing the role of grieving granddaughter fighting for family justice. She'd clearly hired a PR consultant. Her outfit was perfectly chosen to convey dignified suffering, and she'd coached Mason and Madison to look appropriately somber for the cameras. I arrived quietly through the side entrance with Margaret and David, avoiding the spectacle entirely. Inside the courtroom, Victoria's attorney, James Blackstone, was everything his reputation promised: silver-haired, commanding presence, and a voice that could convince juries that black was white. His opening statement painted Rose as a confused elderly woman manipulated by her adopted granddaughter into betraying her biological family. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Blackstone intoned, "this case is about a vulnerable senior citizen who was systematically isolated from her loving biological granddaughter and manipulated into leaving her life's work to someone who calculated her way into an inheritance." Victoria dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, the picture of wounded innocence. Then Margaret stood for our opening statement, and the temperature in the room shifted. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is indeed about manipulation, but not the kind Mr. Blackstone described. This is about a woman who tried to manipulate her grandmother's final months by suddenly appearing with financial needs after years of neglect." She pressed a button on her laptop, and the courtroom screens filled with Rose's visitor logs from the assisted living facility. These records show that over the past 5 years, Rebecca Thompson visited Rose Patterson 260 times. Victoria Patterson visited 7 times, 6 of those visits coinciding with requests for money. The jury's attention was immediate and complete. Margaret continued methodically destroying Victoria's narrative, the psychiatric evaluations proving Rose's mental competency, the security footage showing me caring for Rose without ever discussing finances, the recorded conversations where Victoria discussed treating Rose as a financial resource rather than a person. But the devastating blow came when Margaret played Victoria's birthday party recording. The jury watched Victoria dismiss me as not really family, while Rose stood just out of frame, and several jurors visibly recoiled at the coldness in her voice. Victoria's face went white as the implications hit her. Not only was her legal case collapsing, but her public image was being destroyed in front of cameras that would broadcast this humiliation across the internet. During the lunch recess, I watched through the courthouse windows as Victoria faced a gauntlet of reporters asking pointed questions about her treatment of Rose and her adopted sister. Her careful media strategy dissolved as she snapped at journalists, revealing the entitled fury beneath her grief performance. The afternoon brought character witnesses. Victoria's parade of family members testified about biological bonds and traditional inheritance expectations, but their testimonies felt hollow after the morning's evidence. When it was my turn, I didn't need character witnesses. I had Rose's own words. Margaret played a video Rose had recorded just 3 months before her death, specifically for this moment. On screen, Rose looked directly into the camera with clear, determined eyes. If anyone is watching this recording, it means Victoria is trying to claim I wasn't competent to make my own decisions about my estate. Let me be perfectly clear. I am of sound mind. I understand exactly what I'm doing. And I'm leaving everything to Rebecca, because she proved that love isn't about DNA. It's about showing up. The video continued with Rose detailing Victoria's years of neglect, her constant financial requests, and her dismissive attitude toward my adoption. Victoria thinks blood makes family, but she never learned that family is something you build through daily choices. Rebecca built a family relationship with me through 15 years of Thursday afternoons, while Victoria built a banking relationship. When the video ended, the courtroom was silent except for the sound of Victoria crying, not the dignified tears of her morning performance, but the ugly sobs of someone watching their world collapse in real time. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman read the verdict with conviction. We find no evidence of mental incapacity or undue influence. Rose Patterson's will stands as written. Outside the courthouse, Victoria faced the cameras again, but this time without her composed facade. Her makeup had run from crying, her hair was disheveled from running her hands through it, and her voice cracked as she tried to maintain her victimhood narrative. This isn't justice. That money was supposed to secure my children's future. A reporter immediately followed up. Ms. Patterson, what about the recording where you said adopted children don't belong at the main table? Do you still believe blood ties are more important than the 15 years Rebecca spent caring for your grandmother? Victoria's response was everything I could have hoped for. You don't understand. I am the real granddaughter. She was just some stranger my parents felt sorry for. The money should go to actual family. The clip would be viewed millions of times within hours, cementing Victoria's reputation as someone who valued inheritance over love, DNA over devotion. That evening, Emma and I sat in our garden as the Seattle sunset painted the sky in shades of victory. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from family members who wanted to reconcile, now that the legal battle was over, but I ignored them all. Victoria had taught me something valuable about family. It wasn't something you inherited or demanded. It was something you earned through your choices, day after day, year after year. And she'd failed that test spectacularly. The aftermath of the trial brought consequences Victoria never saw coming. Within days, her humiliation had gone viral globally, with adoption advocacy groups using her courthouse meltdown as an example of everything wrong with biological supremacy thinking. The hashtag #AdoptedAndProud trended for weeks, with thousands sharing stories of chosen family triumph over blood relation toxicity. But the social media storm was nothing compared to the financial devastation that followed. Victoria's husband's business partners had watched the trial coverage and immediately terminated their relationships, unwilling to be associated with the family's public disgrace. Their remaining clients canceled contracts after seeing Victoria's real granddaughter rant, leaving them without income just as their legal bills mounted. The private school where Mason and Madison were enrolled politely, but firmly suggested the family find alternative educational arrangements after Victoria's courthouse behavior embarrassed the institution. Other families began avoiding Victoria at school events and social functions, treating her like a social pariah whose entitlement might be contagious. Margaret called me Wednesday evening with news that felt like poetic justice. Rebecca, Victoria's legal team, has informed us that she can't pay their fees. Blackstone and Associates is seeking judgment against her for $350,000 in unpaid legal costs. I set down my coffee, processing the irony. So, she spent money she didn't have to fight for money she was never going to get? Exactly. And there's more. Her husband filed for bankruptcy yesterday, listing their home in foreclosure. Apparently, they'd been counting on winning the inheritance to solve their financial problems. That weekend, I drove past Victoria's neighborhood and saw the for sale sign on their lawn, along with the smaller foreclosure notice that made my heart sing with satisfaction. The BMW was gone, replaced by an older Honda with a cracked windshield. Through the windows, I could see moving boxes stacked in what had once been their perfectly decorated living room. Emma was with me, working on homework in the passenger seat. She looked up as we passed the house and asked quietly, "Is that where Aunt Victoria lives?" "Used to live," I corrected. "They're moving somewhere smaller." "Because they don't have money anymore?" I chose my words carefully. "Because they made choices that had consequences, sweetheart. When you treat people badly and then try to take things that don't belong to you, sometimes life teaches you a lesson about the difference between what you want and what you deserve." Monday brought the final humiliation for Victoria. I was having coffee with Margaret when she received a call from David Chen. She listened for a moment, then hung up with a smile that looked almost predatory. "Victoria just called our office. She wants to meet with you." "For what?" "She's requesting a family loan. Apparently, she needs $50,000 to avoid homelessness and wants to borrow against what she calls her future inheritance prospects." The audacity was breathtaking, but perfectly Victoria. Even in complete defeat, she still believed the world owed her something based on her biological connection to Rose. I agreed to the meeting out of pure curiosity. We met at a coffee shop near Victoria's old neighborhood, and the transformation was shocking. Her designer clothes had been replaced by discount store outfits. Her perfect manicure was chipped and grown out. Most tellingly, her arrogant confidence had been replaced by desperate pleading. "Rebecca, please, I know we've had our differences, but we're still family. Rose would want you to help me in my time of need." Her voice shook as she spoke, and I could see the panic in her eyes. I stirred my latte thoughtfully before responding. "Victoria, I have a question for you. Do you remember what you said to me at the family reunion? About blood ties being more important than chosen family?" She flushed red but pressed on. I was just trying to preserve tradition. I didn't mean anything personal by it." "And do you remember what you told Grandma Rose about me not being real family? About how I should be excluded from family decisions after she died?" I was concerned about. She couldn't finish the lie. I leaned forward, my voice gentle but implacable. "Victoria, You spent years telling everyone that blood makes family, that adoption doesn't create real bonds, that DNA determines who deserves what. I paused to let that sink in. Well, now you get to live with the consequences of that philosophy. What do you mean? I mean that since I'm not really family according to you, I have no family obligation to help you. Since blood ties are more important than chosen relationships, you should ask your biological relatives for assistance. Since adopted children don't belong at the main table, I don't belong in your financial rescue plan. Victoria's face crumpled as she realized I was using her own words against her. Rebecca, please. I was wrong. I see that now. Adoption does make real family. You are my real sister. I stood to leave, dropping a 20 on the table for my coffee. That's interesting, Victoria. But here's what I learned from watching you. Family isn't something you get to claim when it's convenient. It's something you build through your actions over time. And your actions told me everything I needed to know about what kind of family you thought we were. As I walked away, I heard her calling after me, her voice breaking with desperation. But I didn't turn around. Victoria had made her choices, and now she got to live with them. That evening, Emma and I sat in Rose's library, working on her school project about family trees. She was carefully drawing connections between people who loved each other, regardless of biology. As I watched her work, I realized that Rose's final gift wasn't just financial security. It was the lesson that family is about who chooses to love you, not who shares your DNA. Victoria was learning that lesson too, just from the other side. 6 months later, life had settled into a rhythm that felt both surreal and perfectly natural. Emma thrived in her new private school, the one Rose had specifically researched and prepaid for in her will. Our Thursday afternoons were now spent in Rose's garden, maintaining the roses that had won neighborhood competitions for 30 years. I'd quit my old job and used part of the inheritance to start a nonprofit supporting adoptive families, fulfilling something Rose had mentioned wanting to do, but never had the chance. The irony wasn't lost on me that Victoria's public meltdown had inadvertently created awareness that helped fund my first year of operations. The house had become everything Rose had envisioned, filled with laughter, homework sessions at the kitchen table, and the sounds of a child who finally had room to grow. Emma had claimed Rose's former sewing room as her art studio, and her paintings now hung where Rose's family photos once dominated the walls. I heard through my adoptive parents that Victoria's family had moved to a 2-bedroom apartment across town. Her husband had found work as a night security guard, barely covering their basic expenses. Mason and Madison were attending public school and struggling with the dramatic lifestyle change, according to the family gossip network that still somehow included me. More satisfying was learning that Victoria's social circle had completely evaporated. The women who'd once competed for invitations to her dinner parties now actively avoided her at grocery stores and community events. Her public breakdown had revealed a side of her personality that made former friends question everything they thought they knew about her character. The final justice came in a phone call from Margaret Miller on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Rebecca, I have some interesting news. Victoria has been trying to sell her story to tabloid magazines, claiming she was the victim of inheritance fraud orchestrated by the adoption industry. I laughed despite myself. Please tell me no one bought that narrative. Better than that. 3 different publications called our office to fact-check her claims. When they saw the evidence we provided, the security footage, the recorded conversations, the psychiatric evaluations, they all decided her story wasn't worth printing. One editor told me that Victoria's version was so obviously false that publishing it would damage their credibility. Even in desperation, Victoria couldn't escape the consequences of her choices. Her attempts to monetize her victimhood had failed because the evidence of her manipulation was too overwhelming to ignore. That weekend, Emma and I hosted our first dinner party in the house. My adoptive parents came, along with several colleagues from my nonprofit and Emma's teacher, who'd become a family friend. As I watched Emma confidently playing hostess, showing guests Rose's antique collection, and explaining the history behind various family photos, I felt the profound satisfaction of knowing that Rose's investment in love over biology had created exactly the legacy she'd wanted. During dessert, my adoptive father raised his glass in a toast. To Rose Patterson, who understood that family is built through daily choices, not genetic accidents. and to Rebecca and Emma, who proved that love multiplies when it's shared freely. As we clinked glasses, I thought about Victoria eating dinner in her cramped apartment, probably still plotting ways to claim what she'd never deserved. The contrast was perfect. I was surrounded by chosen family in a house filled with love, while she lived with the consequences of believing that DNA entitled her to things that could only be earned through devotion. Later that evening, after Emma was asleep and the guests had gone home, I sat in Rose's favorite chair with a cup of tea and her final letter, the one she'd asked Margaret to give me exactly 6 months after the will reading. It contained her thoughts about justice, family, and the importance of letting people face the natural consequences of their choices. Rebecca, she'd written, by the time you read this, Victoria will have learned what happens when you mistake entitlement for love. Don't feel guilty about her situation. She created it through years of calculated selfishness. The greatest gift you can give someone like Victoria is the opportunity to understand that actions have consequences. Whether she learns from this experience or continues down the same path is her choice to make. The letter concluded with words that made me smile. You spent 15 years proving that love is a choice we make daily. Now Victoria gets to live with the choices she made. That's not cruelty, my dear. That's justice. Outside, the Seattle rain continued its gentle rhythm against the windows of the house that was truly mine, earned through years of Thursday afternoons and quiet devotion. Somewhere across town, Victoria was probably lying awake, wondering how her life had fallen apart so completely, never quite understanding that she'd destroyed it herself the moment she decided that biology mattered more than love. I finished my tea and turned off the lights, secure in the knowledge that Rose's lesson was complete. Family wasn't about blood ties or inheritance rights or seating arrangements at dinner tables. It was about who showed up, who stayed, and who chose love over entitlement, day after day, year after year. Victoria had finally learned the true meaning of family. She just hadn't learned it the way she'd expected.